There are about 6 or 7 different species of swans around the world. One of those species of swans is the black swan, and the black swan is only known to occur in Australia. In the past, the only swans they knew about were these white swans until the Europeans began to visit Australia, and all of a sudden they recognized these birds that were black when they were white at home. And that was a complete surprise to them that there could be these identical birds that had the exact opposite color. That's the origin of the black swan concept, as being something that was completely unpredictable, but when it happened, it was extremely widespread, and then people began to say, oh, that was obvious that that was going to happen. I worked in the innovation part of the oil and gas industry in a team called GameChanger for Shell. So GameChanger's responsibility was to look for revolutionary, not evolutionary, opportunities, and remarkably, our success rate of finding a company was less than 4%. Better than 95% of what we do failed. And that was the only place I've ever worked where a 95% failure rate was a good, you're doing well. And this has been very successful for Shell. Some of the biggest Shell projects have come from the back of a cocktail napkin. But that's what the point of a game changer is that it's very, very low probability, but when it hits big. After I was in the Game Changer team, I knew I was on my way out, and I had one more job, and they let me pick my own title. And I picked the title Black Swan Detector because I was looking for ideas that were black swan disruptive, things that no one could think possible, but when they became possible, they were very widespread, and people began to say, well, that was obvious, that was just evolution. So that's the idea behind the Black Swan Detector role, is looking for those innovative, disruptive ideas. When I was at Shell, there were 2 parts to the team. One team was looking for innovation in oil and gas. One was looking for innovation in new energies, wind, solar, biofuels, all that kind of thing. I was in the oil and gas side, and I wanted to be in the new energy side. The only thing I could find that connected those 2 areas was geothermal energy.
Geothermal energy is using the natural, renewable energy of the earth to create heating, air conditioning, and electricity. With the geothermal industry, we have these 3 buckets, if you will. One is geothermal heat pumps, and that is what you think of when you might have a residence or a building that uses coils that are called shallow geothermal, so they're not too deep underground, and you're using that to create air conditioning and heating for a building or a community of buildings. So that's one bucket. The second bucket is what we call direct use, and that is things like industrial use of geothermal resources or thermal energy networks, where you are connecting large districts together and using geothermal resources for heating and cooling applications, but at a larger scale than a house or a home. The third bucket has the most different types of technologies, the third bucket being power generation. You've got traditional hydrothermal, you've got closed-loop geothermal systems, you've got engineered geothermal systems, or EGS. Those are the different types of technologies that are being developed in the geothermal space right now.
I came up with a list of the top 10 reasons why not geothermal energy. That was my recipe to how to find a disruptive company, was to find a company that could address the top 10 reasons why not. If we can find someone that fixes that, then we have fixed the problems that the experts identified.
Geothermal, it's not become a global energy supply yet because geothermal has the lowest environmental footprint of all energy technologies. It has the lowest life cycle carbon footprint of all renewable energy technologies. And because of that, it's an invisible technology. That's a great thing for the environment, but it's not a good thing for the geothermal industry, where wind turbines and solar and nuclear power plants, you can see them from so far away. So we just don't have that visibility. Also, it's hard to commodify hot water. That's all we're dealing with geothermal is hot water. To try to transport hot water, you can't transport it far. Whereas with oil and gas, you can take that commodity, put it in a barrel, put it in a pipe, send it on a ship, and move it around the world. You can't do that with hot water. So geothermal is a very local energy technology. It's another reason that it hasn't been able to scale.
They had enough knowledge to know that the traditional geothermal wasn't scalable. Old-fashioned geothermal is really only going to work in less than 9% of the surface of the Earth. And that wasn't enough scale, it wasn't large enough for geothermal. So in order for geothermal to really take off, we've got to find a technology that will be applicable in a much broader area, much closer to the consumer. And that's where closed-loop geothermal applies, because closed-loop geothermal is applicable to greater than 80% of the surface of the Earth.
The advanced geothermal energies is a closed-loop system. So they drill down at one point on Earth to where it's heat, and then they drill down at another, and they drill horizontally to meet at that end, really creating a loop. They isolate the wellbore with their secret sealant, and then run a fluid through that loop, and that fluid is what picks up the heat subsurface, brings it to the surface, converts it to energy, and then it cools and then goes back down the other side, heats. It self-circulates, which is amazing. You might need an initial pump to turn it on, but then just the heating and cooling of the fluid circulates itself. That interaction doesn't require producible water, it just requires the heat, which is everywhere. So that opens up the world to the scalability of geothermal energy.
On that list of top 10 reasons why not geothermal, several of them are related to the environmental impact of geothermal. For example, if you have hot water circulating in the rocks beneath the surface and you bring that hot water to the surface and you cool it off, whatever's in that water will crystallize out. And that can be radioactive elements, that can be mercury and other poisonous things. A closed loop system, which has no exposure to the outside rock, just the working fluid stays contained inside the pipe. You never dissolve anything, and you never have anything pollutants or foreign matter that you bring to the surface. The same fluid just keeps going around and around and is never released to the environment. And that's one of the game-changing characteristics of a closed-loop system. The challenge of the new energy system is that there is tension in the socio-economic world about whether we should adopt these technologies and which technologies should we adopt and what are the positives and the negatives of that adoption. And when you go through the list of the characteristics of geothermal energy, there's an awful lot of positive impacts that address many of the concerns of people. Like, for example, wind and solar take up a lot of land, and geothermal takes up a tenth or less of land, because so much of geothermal is really underground and you never see it. All you see is the surface part of it that makes the electricity or work in a greenhouse. That's the only surface manifestation. And that addresses the community's concern about taking over farmland and having ugly big turbines spinning in the skyline. Don't have that with geothermal.
We need to start thinking more holistically about that, because we won't solve the climate crisis with just wind and solar alone. We have to have this baseload, clean, firm technology, and that only technology that offers that is geothermal.
Some people might think that, oh, geothermal energy, clean energy is going to replace or take jobs from everyone in the oil and gas industry, when that's really not the case. Geothermal industry today is the direct result of oil and gas. From top to bottom, it requires all those workers and their experience to develop it to its potential, and it will continue to.
So much of what we do in the geothermal world is exactly the same as what we do in the oil and gas world. The drilling, the reservoir management, the subsurface geology, all of that stuff is exactly the same. The other part of it is not just about people, it's about data. The oil and gas companies have huge storehouses of well data, of seismic data, of all sorts of geologic data that we can simply apply to solving geothermal problems. And it's another way that allows the scaling of geothermal rapidly is that we don't have to go out and collect a bunch of data. It's already there.
We cannot rely on fossil fuels for all of our energy needs moving forward. There is simply going to be too much demand for energy in the future. The geothermal energy and all forms of clean and renewable energy are going to be required to provide us the energy security we need. And this will help oil companies across the country meet their clean energy goals.
As we transition away from fossil fuels and into renewable energy technologies like geothermal, solar, and wind, we're seeing a geothermal rising and is a coalition forming that is unique and I think unheard of and unseen. We are seeing oil and gas companies join Geothermal Rising because we are, at the end of the day, a membership organization and a professional organization. We're also seeing environmental and climate NGOs join, and both of those entities don't normally work together. But with geothermal, we see a nexus where these different organizations and companies are coming together because they both see value and attributes of geothermal technologies that they can benefit from. The environmental and climate NGOs see geothermal as one of the solutions to drawing down the climate crisis, and the oil and gas industry sees geothermal as a potential solution for their business models going forward when there's going to be less fossil fuels in our energy mix. It's a one-to-one, and that is why geothermal is so important to protecting the environment and drawing down the climate crisis. Ironically, even though geothermal is the most environmentally friendly and has the lowest carbon footprint of all energy technologies, geothermal is the hardest to permit in the United States on federal land. So we need to reform some of those rules, and we're working on that with Congress and with the Department of the Interior.
The Geothermal Energy Act, it's basically an amendment on the Geothermal Steam Act of 1970. Technologies were vastly different back then, as you can imagine. We need to be able to streamline the permitting processes for these so that we can expand this potential of geothermal energy.
The Geothermal Opportunity Act, the Geothermal Energy Optimization Act, both of these acts promote geothermal energy, specifically on federal lands. And these bills have been passed with bipartisan support from Democrats and Republicans both, because they see the importance in the future of geothermal energy.
In Texas, where I live, when we lobbied the legislature there, we got the 5 key bills passed that we needed to make geothermal possible in Texas, with a total of 4 no votes. That's got to be a record, that there's that much support on 5 separate bills for what we need to make geothermal possible, and we see the same thing happening at the national level and around the world. My worldview of the opportunity for geothermal is almost limitless. There are so many varieties of ways of geothermal that can get used. You can make electricity with it, great. We can power our cars, we can power our homes, but there's 1,000 other things that you can do. And my vision is that we produce the hot water, we make electricity from the hot water, but that once the temperature drops below what you can make electricity with, well, then that goes into a factory and is used for dry cleaning or beer brewing. Once it's a little bit cooler and can't be used there, then it gets connected to the greenhouse where we're growing food or whatever the valuable crops are that we need. And then that finally, that last element of heat goes into heating a home or a community. So for me, the great vision of geothermal is not just making electrons, but it's feeding into the demands, the uses that we need as a society across a whole supply chain. So my vision is that we have a cascading set of opportunities for geothermal.
I think it's completely possible that we transition to 100% geothermal energy in the future. Imagine the peace in the world if every country is energy independent. There's no conflicts over the Middle East oil and US oil and where that is moved to. There's less risks of oil spills because it's not traveling across the street. Every country could be energy independent. That's an exciting goal that I would love to see.
We need that Black Swan event. We need to more quickly disrupt the status quo so that we can draw down the climate crisis faster. That does not mean that people are going to be out of jobs, and that's where geothermal comes in. It provides that off-ramp for the oil and gas industry into the geothermal industry, and so there is a natural process there, the natural synergies to bring that workforce into the future.
As I spoke earlier, I mentioned my title as Black Swan Detector, where I go and try and find these innovative companies. But I've adopted a new name. I call myself the Geothermal Evangelist. I am out there trying to evangelize for raising the opportunity, raising the water for all boats, and I do that by lobbying at the legislature. I also teach at university, getting the students involved in geothermal. I could have just retired after I left Shell, but I decided to become this geothermal evangelist because I thought I could advocate and evangelize geothermal, and here's a way you can take those geoscience skills and have a positive impact on the planet. Anywhere I can get people to listen to me, I'm out there like a preacher talking about geothermal energy.